And then our partners tonight have been Oregon City High School, Oregon City Police Department. As I mentioned, the school district has been a huge supporter of us, the Chamber of Commerce, and Willamette Falls Media Center. We want to take a minute to thank all of those, so please stand. People are so bad about standing up when you tell them to stand up. So, and then last, if you're a youth in the room, thank you so much for coming tonight. Please stand up. This is about you guys. And then I just want to send a personal thank you to the parents who have come and taken their time away to help be champions for the kids, learn some great information tonight. We are going to really, I think, walk away feeling well-informed and better prepared for things that are in front of us and things that are going to change with the marijuana laws. So we can take care of our kids the way we've been trying to do and really support them through this journey. So with that, I want to invite Tom Lovell up. He is the Oregon City High School principal to get us going this evening. Please welcome Tom.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight and for making the time to make this an important part of your life. As somebody who works every day with around 2,200 students, I'm here hopefully for the same reason that you are, and that is to learn more about marijuana, to learn more about what's going on in our community, to learn more about how we can inform and talk to our kids about it, and to learn more about the new laws in our state. I also want to thank everybody that's involved with Oregon City Together for putting on this forum. I hope all of us leave tonight knowing a little bit more than we do right now. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator tonight. His name is Bill Stewart. Bill is a deputy district attorney with Clackamas County. He has served as a community prosecutor since 2005. His duties as the community prosecutor include responsibility for the Overland Park Community Court, management of ongoing community prosecution efforts, development of a community gang response model, and the establishment of an attendance court program for Clackamas County. Prior to his assignment to community prosecution, Bill prosecuted misdemeanors, property felonies, vehicular assaults, and homicides since joining the Clackamas County DA's office in 2002. Please welcome Mr. Bill Stewart.
Thanks, folks, and thanks for being here tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Eric Martin. Before I get into all of the things he's done, I would just like to comment, we're not here to debate Measure 91 tonight. It's the law. We're here to talk about the impact on kids and how we as parents and community members can keep kids safe. And so that's going to be the focus of everyone you're going to hear from here, the speakers and the panelists. So with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce your keynote speaker, and that's Eric Martin. He is an international presenter and treatment advocate who has served on several governor's advisory boards in Oregon, including the Governor's Council on Substance Abuse Programs and the Governor's Advisory Board on Drugs and Violent Crime. He is past president and director emeritus of the Addiction Counselor Certification Board of Oregon, ACBO, and as I understand it, in talking to Eric, there are now over 4,000 certified treatment professionals that are part of ACBO in the state of Oregon. He has also produced a number of videos, including Reunited, a video designed for methamphetamine-addicted mothers entering the child welfare system. He has been honored with numerous awards in light of his 26 years of service in addiction treatment and prevention. Most notably, he is the recipient of the Governor's Council Award of Excellence, and he's a recipient of the National Association of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counselors, the William F. Callahan Award for sustained and meritorious service. He currently serves in a leadership capacity to numerous community boards, including New Columbia, CREW, Special Consultant to the African American Addiction Recovery and Counseling Association, the Voices of Problem Gambling Recovery, and as a legislative liaison for the Addiction Counselor Certification Board of Oregon. We are very pleased to have him here to speak to us tonight. Eric.
Thank you. So what he didn't mention is that I'm also a recovering person. I went through treatment back in 1983. I was arrested. I was involved in the criminal justice system for a period of time and went through treatment. I started smoking marijuana when I was 8 years old, and marijuana was my most favorite drug. It is the drug that I used the most of, the longest, and I became a daily consumer of marijuana. I eventually got sober after graduating from treatment, and I just like treatment and recovery so much that I've pretty much spent my life in it. So I've actually been working in treatment, prevention, and recovery for over 26 years now. So I've only got 40 minutes, and I'm going to go through a lot of information in 40 minutes. First, I just want to sort of draw a picture of substance use in Oregon and in the United States and internationally. The United States makes up less than 5% of the world's population. We consume about 25% of the world's energy. We take over half of the world's illicit drugs, and we consume about 60% of the world's prescription drugs. We take so much drugs in the United States of America that it's actually starting to come back to us in drinking water. All of the cities that you see in red here are cities where tap water coming out of the sink has tested positive for pharmaceutical drugs. Many of these cities, tap water supply has also tested positive for illicit drugs. Now, these are trace amounts of drugs, so you don't have to be, overly concerned about drinking tap water. But it's a barometer of how much drugs we take. The United States is the #1 drug-taking country in the world. When we take a look at the states that have the highest rates of substance use, the purple states that you see in the chart up there, sort of purple, sort of dark, almost black states, those are the states with the highest rates. Oregon ranks 5th for past marijuana use past year in people 12 and older, and you'll notice that Kansas is 51st. So this also includes the District of Columbia, and that's why we're seeing 51. This data was collected in 2012 and 2013. Whenever you see studies come out, the data was usually collected a year before the study comes out. So for example, there's going to be a new survey for 2015 that's going to come out in spring. So it's going to come out fairly soon, and it's going to survey about 50,000 kids in Oregon, and then the results of that will probably come out either late 2015 or early 2016. This is recent marijuana use in the last 30 days. Oregon ranks 7th among teens aged 12 to 17. And believe it or not, Alabama is 51st. This is looking at Oregon 8th graders versus the US average for 8th graders, and this is looking at past 30-day marijuana use. So you can see marijuana use has sort of ebbed and flowed from 2004 to 2014. And actually, in 2014, we're getting closer to the national average. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it eventually start to go up. And it's very possible that this spring, before the new law goes into effect, that marijuana use could go up. And then some people might point at that and say, well, see what happened? Because the study will come out like in 2016, when in fact the data was collected before the law went into effect. So you always have to be aware of when was the data collected, not when the report came out. So this is looking at past 30-day marijuana use in people 12 and older. Oregon ranks 5th. And this is 2014, but it was data collected in 2012 and 2013, and we rank 5th for past year marijuana use. This is looking at recent illicit drug use other than marijuana. So this would be like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, stuff like that. Other than marijuana, we rank 4th in the US for recent illicit drug use other than marijuana. This is looking at 2014 when the report came out, past year cocaine use among teens 12 to 17, and we're one of the top 10 cocaine states for young people. This is past year cocaine 18 to 25. We're one of the top 10 states, and the purple states are always the top 10 states. This is looking at non-medical use of prescription painkillers like Vicodin and OxyContin. Oregon ranks 2nd in the United States for that. We rank one of the top 10 states for teens, for 18 to 25-year-olds, and for adults 26 and up. So in all age categories, we're one of the top Vicodin, OxyContin abusing states. This is looking at binge alcohol use. And historically, over the last decade or more, Oregon has been one of the top 10 drug-using states, but it's only recently, like in the last 5 years, that we're starting to become one of the big alcohol states. So this is binge use of alcohol, and typically studies that look at binge use of alcohol are looking at drinking 5 or more drinks in one sitting. So this is recent illicit drug use, everything, and we rank 4th in the US for recent illicit drug use, marijuana, and all the other drugs. This is looking at illicit drug use in Oregon from 1999 to 2013, past month illicit drug use in people 12 and older compared to the national average. So Oregon is sort of the dark green, black bar up there, and then the national average is the orange bar. So in most states in the US, illicit drug use actually started to go down after 9/11. Oregon is one of a handful of states where our illicit drug use actually started to go up after 9/11. And it's been increasing over the years. So why are we meeting tonight? Well, we're meeting to talk about marijuana and young people, marijuana and minors. And as we heard, we're not here to debate Ballot Measure 91. It is the law of the land. Ballot Measure 91 has some intents in it, and one of its intents is to prevent the distribution of marijuana to persons under 21 years of age. How does it do this? How does the ballot measure provide for this? Well, for the most part, it does it through citations, fines, loss of driving privileges, misdemeanors, and felonies for people under the age of 21. Additionally, Ballot Measure 91 says that the Commission shall regularly review the rate of taxes, and it will adjust its tax rate, its price point, discouraging the use of marijuana by minors under 21 years of age. And I thought this was actually a really smart thing in Ballot Measure 91, because research is real clear with alcohol and tobacco, that as the price goes up on alcohol and tobacco, youth consumption goes down. So when the price goes up for alcohol, for beer, when the price goes up for cigarettes, adults that may be dependent on cigarettes or alcohol, they can sort of shovel their money around in order to continue drinking or continue smoking cigarettes. But adolescents tend to have a finite amount of money. Either they have enough money or they don't have enough money. They don't have the resources to shovel money around. So all of the research is crystal clear on this particular issue, that as the price goes up, youth consumption goes down. And I thought that was really smart that that was added into Ballot Measure 91, because potentially then that could be adjusted if there's like some big increase in adolescent use. But at the same time, they're not going to want to increase the price so much that it creates a black market for marijuana. So they're going to have to do that judiciously and carefully. NORML has stated in their responsibility statements that they also have a concern for youth and youth consumption of marijuana. They say cannabis consumption is for adults only. It is irresponsible to provide cannabis to children. Most of the marijuana advocates that I've known, that I've spoken to, almost all of them are in agreement that yes, marijuana is not for young people. So the majority of them are on board with that concept. So some of the concerns that schools and parents have are largely, one, will consumption of marijuana go up? What's going to happen with extracts and edibles? So more and more parents have been concerned about the extracts that they hear kids talking about, or they find out that their kids are using. They find torches like in their bedrooms and stuff like that. They're concerned about their safety. And they're concerned about maybe news stories that they see around the consumption of edibles. So there are really 4 major concerns regarding early onset marijuana use when it comes to research and what research reveals. One of the big ones is that early onset use increases the probability of heavier use and more marijuana-related problems later in life, compared to people who begin using as adults. Early onset marijuana use leads to faster development of tolerance compared to people who start using as adults. And I had that experience. And we see a lot of young people that come into treatment services that have this accelerated tolerance that has been shown in research. And I'll tell you where researchers think how this evolves in the developing brain of adolescents. When I started smoking marijuana, I would smoke any marijuana. I would get marijuana from anybody, I would buy it from anybody. But then as tolerance kicked in, I started to get picky about the marijuana that I smoked. I wouldn't smoke just any marijuana. I wouldn't buy just any marijuana. I would look at it, I would smell it. If I could smell it through the plastic, then I knew it had to be good. So then I started smoking more, and I started smoking more marijuana, and smoking more marijuana. Then I started smoking hash, and then I started smoking hash oil. And back in the 70s and 80s, we had hash oil that really was oil. So now there's this product, butane honey oil. People call it oil, but it's not really oil. It's resin, it's not oil. And they use butane as the solvent to leach THC out of the marijuana, where we used oil back in the 70s and 80s to do that. So my tolerance kept getting more and more, and I would put oil on my marijuana before I would smoke it, or I would dip joints in oil, but it was all because of tolerance, tolerance, tolerance. And my tolerance got so bad that I started having to take tolerance breaks. And I would tell my friends, I'm gonna quit smoking weed for a week so my tolerance will go back down. Now, I rarely ever made it a week. Sometimes I didn't even make it more than a couple hours, but that's what I would tell people. But tolerance appears to evolve more rapidly in young people. Tolerance to alcohol, tolerance to tobacco, tolerance to marijuana. And it's not entirely clear why that is, but scientists have some ideas. Research is pretty clear on this. In a fairly substantial study, they found the risk of experiencing drug dependence problems was robustly greater for adolescent recent onset users of cocaine, psychostimulant drugs, analgesics, anxiolytic medicines, that would be like Valium, Xanax, inhalant drugs like gas, glue, nitrous oxide, and cannabis as compared to adult recent onset users. So when somebody starts using a drug as an adult, they don't have this rapid increase in tolerance the way that kids do. It's a faster progression of dependence. This was a study of 17,000 people by the NIAAA, looking at the age of onset of alcohol consumption. The blue line represents all 17,000 people in the study. Of the kids that started drinking at age 13 or younger, about 43% of them later developed alcohol dependence, alcoholism. And then they took that 17,000 people in the blue line and they broke it down into two categories. The people with a family history of alcoholism and the people that had no family history of alcoholism. Of the kids that started drinking at age 13 and younger with a family history of alcoholism, about half of them ended up developing alcoholism themselves. So there are substantial studies, and there have been reviews that have been analyzed by a bunch of different groups, including NORML. In their congressional testimony that they presented in 1999 in Congress, they submitted an analysis of cannabis users in the United States and Canada and Europe. And Dr. Alan Marlett, who was a famous harm reduction researcher and another advocate for the legalization of drugs, he did a big analysis of US data, and the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, they've analyzed data. The important thing to understand is that not everybody smokes marijuana the same. Not everybody smokes the same. In fact, 57% of people in the United States that use marijuana, they use it less than annually. They've tried it a few times in their lives, or they smoke like every couple years. Then another big chunk is the blue pie users. The blue pie marijuana users use less than monthly. These people use marijuana a couple times a year. Big smoking days for these people is like New Year's Eve and July 4th. Then there's the past month users. These are sort of like your weekend warrior people. These are the people that use marijuana on the weekends. Then there's the weekend plus people. They use 2 to 4 days per week. And then the daily people, they use 5 to 7 days per week. 92% of people who use marijuana in the United States use less than weekly. So you actually have a small group of people that are doing most of the marijuana consumption. This is also true with tobacco. This is also true with alcohol. You have a small group that's consuming the biggest chunk of it. So let's talk a little bit about this rapid onset. Let me just see how much time I have left here. How much time do I have? Anybody know? Where's my moderator? I have 20 minutes? Oh, I'm doing good. So this is a brain cell. And I don't really have to explain this to most of the young people in the room, because they get this all now in school. So like, we didn't get this when we were in school, but now they teach all this stuff in school. They talk about brain cells and how brain cells work, and axons and dendrites and all of that stuff. So this is a brain cell, and what's unique about your brain cells is that they communicate with each other. The way they communicate is by manufacturing chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are largely produced in axons, and they're released from axons. The dendrites are the receiving side of the cell. So here we have an axon on a brain cell going off this way. We'll call this brain cell A. Here we have a dendrite over here going off to this way, and we'll call this brain cell B. Brain cell A is going to talk to brain cell B by firing out neurotransmitters. There's over 100 natural brain chemicals that have been identified by science. What are some of the names of these natural brain chemicals? Dopamine. What else? Serotonin. GABA. What? Oxytocin. Right, so there's a ton of these brain chemicals: epinephrine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, anandamide, endorphin. These natural brain chemicals move from here over to here, and they attach to these receptor sites. And they fit into those receptors like a key fitting into a lock. So, for example, there is a natural brain chemical called endorphin. And endorphin was discovered back in the 1960s, and it's our body's natural painkiller. When we feel pain, our brain manufactures and releases endorphin. And endorphin means the morphine within. Endo means inside, morphine. So endorphin is released, and it connects to these receptors. The receptor is sticking out of the cell wall. The cell wall is made up of chains of fat called lipid chains, so the receptor is sort of swishing around in these lipid chains. When endorphin attaches to the receptor, ka-chunk, it diminishes the feeling of pain. Opiate drugs like heroin, Vicodin, and OxyContin, they do the same thing. They have a similar molecular shape as your brain's natural endorphin, and they plug into the same identical receptors. They plug into the receptors and diminish the feeling of pain. Now, there's a basic rule in human pharmacology that says if you take a chemical that looks like a chemical made naturally inside your body, and you take that chemical every single day, in a period of time, in as little as 3 days, your body will stop its own natural production of that chemical, and/or it'll stop making receptor sites for that chemical. So if I take opiate drugs every day, my brain stops making endorphin. Why does my brain stop making endorphin? Because I don't need it, because now I'm getting the chemical artificially from an outside source. All right, so now I've decided I'm going to quit. I've been using OxyContin every day for the past year, and now I've decided I'm going to quit. Now I have no OxyContin, and my brain stopped making endorphin a year ago. What is my #1 symptom of withdrawal? Pain, exactly. So opiate-dependent people who go into withdrawal, they feel pain. Everything hurts. I realized this when I was working in detox back in the 1980s. I sat by this heroin addict's bed for 8 hours while he was detoxing, my entire shift. And he said, "Eric, every time I open and close my eyes, it feels like sandpaper." He said, "The pain is shooting into my head." He said every time he took a breath, that it hurt, because every nerve ending in his body was screaming in pain. But eventually, his body started to make its own natural endorphin again. Eventually, he didn't need opiates anymore, and he stopped taking them. There is a chemical in your brain that looks just like delta-9 THC from marijuana, and it is called anandamide. Anandamide is the natural THC of the human brain. THC fits into receptors called CB1 receptors that are intended for your brain's natural anandamide. If I use this every single day, my brain can make less anandamide and definitely can make less receptor sites. This is how most psychoactive drugs work. Most psychoactive drugs look like chemicals that already exist inside the human brain. So here is a cannabinoid 1, a CB1 receptor. It's sticking out of a cell wall. It's waiting for anandamide to plug into the receptor and activate the receptor. But I can start using THC instead, and it will activate the receptors. 3 studies have shown that the chronic administration of THC can lead to decreased production of anandamide in different parts of the brain. And research on this is sort of mixed, but over 30 studies have shown chronic administration of THC can lead to downregulation of receptors. Downregulation of receptors is where receptors become overactivated, overstimulated, and they just grow shut. The receptors slide down into the cytoplasm of the cell. They make themselves unavailable because they're being overstimulated. When a large number of receptors grow shut, downregulate, this causes the condition known as tolerance, the need to use more to get the same effect. So as receptors downregulate, then it doesn't matter. I'm smoking and I'm smoking more marijuana, but I'm not getting the high that I originally got when I first started using. So we know from studies on humans and animals that downregulation of receptors happens more quickly in adolescence. And we also know on studies on tobacco that when adolescents quit smoking tobacco, that the brain doesn't heal, it doesn't change back as quickly as it does in adults. There isn't a change in those receptors. So in a way, it looks like from the research that it's actually harder for kids to quit smoking tobacco than it is for adults. We often think of older adults who are smoking like, my goodness, they've been smoking for 40 years. That's going to be really hard for them to quit. But in fact, it may actually be harder for adolescents to quit based on measurable withdrawal symptoms. So when receptors downregulate, cells become less active. This is a glucose metabolism scan, SPECT, single photon emission computed tomography, looking at a brain of an early onset chronic marijuana user. This isn't brain damage, there aren't holes in the brain or anything like that. It's just that when receptor sites downregulate, when they grow shut, now the cells aren't reaching their action potentials. They're not absorbing glucose. They're not active. If a person quits, then receptors will upregulate. But it takes time. So, another big concern is that early onset marijuana use can produce measurable changes in brain function, cognition, and IQ. And this seems to occur in use exceeding more than 3 days per week in most of the research studies. And this is true in both human and animal studies. There are really 4 ladies who are the primary researchers on early onset marijuana use in the United States. Dr. Liz Dahl is one of the main researchers. She has found in her research, looking at early onset use, where kids are using 4 or more days per week, poorer performance on thinking tasks, including slower psychomotor speed, poorer complex attention, verbal memory, and planning ability is affected as well. I'll let Dr. Meyer basically explain her study.
I studied the effects of persistent cannabis use on IQ. So we asked whether persistent cannabis users lost IQ points from childhood to adulthood. We found that people who started using cannabis as teenagers, by the time they were 38, they lost about...
Well, hold on a second. Let me try this again.
8 IQ points. We studied about 1,000 people who were born in Dunedin, New Zealand in 1972 and 73, and we followed them up approximately every other year, all the way till they were 38 years old. When they were 7 to 13 years old, we gave them IQ tests. Then we assessed their cannabis use from the time they were 18 to 38, and then we gave them IQ tests again at 38. So we could look at their intellectual functioning in childhood before they began using cannabis, and then again in adulthood after some of them had already been using cannabis. We found declines across measures of mental function, so not just IQ. We looked at memory, executive functioning, which is the ability to multitask, plan ahead, processing speed, reaction time. We also looked at whether informants noticed cognitive problems among persistent cannabis users. So we didn't just look at standardized tests, we looked at how people were functioning in everyday lives. And we found that informants noticed more cognitive problems, attention and memory problems, among persistent cannabis users. In this study, we've defined persistent cannabis use as dependence on cannabis over multiple years. And dependence generally refers to using cannabis despite experiencing problems associated with cannabis use. Those could be physical health problems, legal problems, or relationship problems. So we looked at it in 2 different ways. We looked at persistent cannabis dependence, but we also looked at persistent regular cannabis use. And we defined regular cannabis use as using cannabis 4 or more days per week. Regular teen cannabis users who stopped using later in life by adulthood, they still showed IQ decline. So quitting use as an adult didn't result in recovery of IQ function. We don't know when the damage is done, but we do think that the damage is lasting. Our findings that adolescent or teenage cannabis users show IQ decline are consistent with other studies, both animal and human studies, suggesting that adolescents may be particularly vulnerable to the effects of cannabis on mental function. We wanted to know if there were perhaps alternative explanations that could account for this finding of the effect of cannabis on IQ decline. And so we looked at some of the most obvious potential alternative explanations, such as recent cannabis use the night before neuropsychological testing at age 38, alcohol use or other drug use, tobacco use. And what we did is we took all of these factors into account. And after we took them into account, we still found that persistent cannabis users showed IQ decline, suggesting that none of these alternative explanations could account for the findings. There was a hypothesis put forward that low social class could possibly explain our findings that persistent cannabis users experience IQ decline. And in fact, we went back and we controlled for social class, and we found that social class couldn't account for the effects. Even after taking into account low social class, persistent cannabis users still showed IQ decline. It'd be really nice to combine this kind of before and after study, so before you use cannabis and after you use cannabis, with neuroimaging to look at how cannabis affects the brain, both the function and the structure. I think it's also important, people want to know how much cannabis needs to be used and over what ages. And I think those are future areas for research.
So in 2013, there was an analysis of 14 peer-reviewed studies. 13 found that age of onset was a predictor of more severe cognitive, structural, and functioning symptoms. So the adolescent brain just has less protective cells. It has less glial cells. It has less of these other protective cells that the adult brain has. So drugs have a more profound effect on the adolescent brain. They're not entirely sure why they see rapid downregulation of receptors, but they know that it does happen. Early onset marijuana use may exacerbate adolescents predisposed to psychotic or schizoid conditions. So research is starting to get pretty clear on this. Reviewing peer-reviewed studies on marijuana and schizoid disorders has found a strong association between early onset heavy cannabis use and activation of psychotic symptoms. Did marijuana cause the schizoid symptoms or psychotic disorder? No. The answer is no. Marijuana does not cause schizophrenia. It does not cause psychotic symptoms, but it does exacerbate it in young people that are predisposed to that condition. So they have actually found the genetic covariant in young people, and it has to do with an enzyme that's produced in the brain. So when kids that are predisposed to psychotic or schizoid disorders use marijuana, it just simply exacerbates it. They have an earlier onset of schizoid or psychotic symptoms, and they have a more severe onset of schizoid and psychotic symptoms. But does marijuana cause it? No. So, I think that's about it. So, and we're doing questions last, is that right? Yes. Okay, all right. So now we have another speaker coming up.
Eric, thank you very much.
Sure.
If you can, we're going to ask Judge McNeese to come on up, and Judge. Good setup. So we will be bringing Eric back up at the end when we have general questions for that. It's my pleasure to introduce a co-worker, someone who I've really enjoyed working with. Lorraine McNeese is a local attorney who has been practicing law for 25 years and has served as Oregon City's municipal judge for 15 years. She graduated from Oregon City High School and went on to attend Merrillhurst. Let me give you that. I believe it's on. And then after Merrillhurst, she went to Northwestern School of Law at Lewis and Clark College. All three of Lorraine's children attended Oregon City schools. Her private practice focuses on family law, and I believe she's going to be able to share with you a personal experience related to drug use. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm not here tonight as a judge or as a lawyer. I'm here as a mom. It's a little intimidating to follow these experts and to be among so many mental health professionals who really know their stuff. I'm just going to tell you what happened to me and how I'm coping with it. Almost, well, it'll be 6 years, 6 days from today will be 10 years from the date that my son died of a drug overdose. He was 25 years of age. He had an IQ of 160. He had a sense of humor that I envied. I miss him every day. And he started out using marijuana. And then he graduated on to harder drugs. I'm educated. I'm intelligent. I talk to my kids from the day they were raised from the day that they could understand about these are the things you stay away from. These are the friends you stay away from. These are the places you avoid. I trusted my kids. I felt that I had educated them well about drugs. And then when I began to suspect that my son was using drugs, what did he do? He got the sweetest puppy dog face you'd ever see. No, Mom. I'm telling you, moms and dads here, if you confront your kids about drug use, they're gonna lie to you. They're gonna lie. Expect that. We don't like to believe our children are liars. We don't like to believe that they're gonna con us, but they're going to con us. I know that we have more people here than I was expecting, but I thought I also knew what a drug addict looked like. That was taken 2 months before he died. Isn't that one of the most handsome kids you'd ever see? I miss him every single day. What happens to me now as a mom is I'm not learning to forgive myself. What happens is every day, and particularly when we come upon the anniversary of his death, I think of more things that I woulda, shoulda, coulda done to perhaps prevent his death, perhaps prevent his drug use. And some of the things have already been touched upon, and I think will be in the future. I trusted my kids so much, I didn't lock up my drugs. I broke my back. I had a number of back surgeries. So I had pain pills, muscle relaxants in the medicine cabinet. I trusted my kids. I talked to them about the dangers of drugs. I didn't lock them up. And when it looked like pills were missing, I just thought, I just must not have been paying attention. I was so busy. Denial on my part. Treatment. Should I have put my child into treatment? Because obviously by the time he became an adult, there's nothing I can do to get him into treatment if that's what he needs. Should I have been more aggressive about confronting him? I confronted him on a fairly regular basis, and he'd get that sweet little puppy dog face and say, "No, Mom, not me." You know, they say this about lawyers, and I know they also say this about drunks and addicts. How can you tell when a lawyer, a drunk, or drug addict is lying? When their lips are moving. And that's the attitude you've got to take. There were times that I would find things in my son's room and pretended like I didn't see them. I'm telling you, moms and dads, if you want to save your child's life, and I don't mean just from death, save them from a life of pain, agony, perhaps legal complications, a failure to achieve their best potential. Your kids have no right to privacy. You go home tonight, go through their dresser drawers, read their journals, open their Facebook, check their text messages. Don't give your children the right of privacy that they think they're entitled to. You're the parent. It's your job to keep them away from this, to educate yourself, to make sure that you don't lose a handsome child like I did, that I have to live with now for the rest of my life. The beautiful thing about what's happening here tonight and about the internet is you folks, when you find a pill laying on the floor in your child's bedroom, you can go on the internet, pop up an index, look at that pill, and see what it is. I didn't have that luxury. It was still kind of a dirty secret if your children were using drugs. At the time my son was affected. Now parents have let go of that shame and hiding it, because doing that doesn't do you any good, it doesn't do your child any good, it doesn't get the necessary help. You're educating yourselves tonight about drugs, you're learning about the impact that it has on the brain and on the development of a child. That is the first and greatest step a parent can make, is learning about these things. I didn't. I thought I was pretty smart. I thought I was pretty well educated. So I didn't avail myself of all of the resources that were out there, although they were limited at the time. You have many more. But go on the internet, do your research, come to meetings like this, confront your children, Put them in rehab if that's what's necessary. Don't take their word for it. That doesn't mean that all kids are liars. That doesn't mean that all kids are drug users. But moms and dads, these people are your heart. If you suspect there's drug use, you're probably right. And it's up to you to try to intervene. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to you. I just talk from my heart because I'm talking to you as a mom. And I do hope that all of you will just take home everything that you're learning here tonight and apply it. Love your kids, hug them. My greatest source of solace is that the last words I said to Patrick the night before he died was, "I love you too." So at least I don't have that regret. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Your Honor. What we have an opportunity now is we're going to have a panel of 4 individuals who are going to share their different perspectives on marijuana use in youth. And so I'd ask Paige, Amber, Kevin, and Ken to come up. Please take a seat here at the front table. And while they're doing that, I'm going to share with you introductions of all 4. And then we are going to, after they've spent about 2 or 3 minutes providing an overview, we're then going to start taking questions. And I already have a series of written questions. I would ask that if you have others, please fill them out now and move them forward. We're going to also ask Judge McNeese and Eric Martin to come back up and to take questions as well. So we'll do that. We'll do that after our panel's had a chance to speak. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable there. And not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, Judge. I'll call you back up. Sorry, I should have been clearer. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists at this point. Officer Kevin Carlson, gentleman with the uniform on, has been a police officer of Oregon City for 3 years with an additional 3 years of volunteer police service. Prior to serving at the Oregon City Police Department, he is currently completing a bachelor's degree in criminology and criminal justice from the Portland State University. He has been involved in marijuana arrests, citations for minor possession, and assisted drug detectives on illegal marijuana growing operations work on patrol with OCPD. So Kevin, welcome. Amber Kersey. Amber, if you want to just raise your hand real quick. She has been employed by the Clackamas County Juvenile Department for 10 years. She has worked in the intake center processing youth brought in by local law enforcement agencies as a tracker working with high-risk youth and their families to help keep youth engaged in pro-social activities and avoid out-of-home placements. And then most recently as a juvenile counselor too, where she works with high-risk youth on probation. I guess from a DA's perspective, that means that she deals with some of the most challenged kids who are facing drug abuse and other things. Over the past year, Ms. Kersey has been the case manager for the Juvenile Drug Court Program. This is a program that supports high-risk youth in receiving intensive outpatient drug and alcohol treatment. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with family and friends, running, reading, and traveling. Amber, welcome. Dr. Ken Ensroth, did I pronounce that correctly, Doctor? Is a psychiatrist and the medical director at Providence Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. His areas of expertise include child and adolescent psychiatry, and he serves as a member of the Executive Council of the Oregon Council on Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. He provides supervision of OHSU psychiatric residents and child psychiatric fellows in both inpatient and outpatient work. He has offered a range of educational presentations to the community on teen depression and suicide prevention, school shootings and how to talk to your kids, bullying trends, and intervention. He's the father of 2 teenage sons, ages 14 and 19. He is a triathlete, trombone player, and sings in the St. John Fisher Church Contemporary Choir. So welcome, Doctor. And then Paige Hurt. Paige, let us know who you are. She is a mental health therapist and youth addictions counselor in her private practice at Foundations Counseling and Consultation Services, where she has 22 years of experience working in the mental health field with youth, adolescents, and families. In addition to her role as a therapist, Paige provides consultation services to educators, mental health agencies, parents, and other community partners in the form of suicide prevention and intervention and mental health and alcohol drug education. She provides youth addiction services in collaboration with the Clackamas County Juvenile Drug Court and MIP programs, and most recently took on the program director role, for the Oregon City Together, the organization that's putting this on. So, Paige, welcome. So, I think to keep this fairly straightforward, I'm going to ask each of you to spend about 3 minutes, make some general remarks, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So I'm just going to pass to you, Doctor, and let you get started. And I'll give you kind of a high sign at about 2:30 or so, okay? So I'll keep track for you.
Very good. Thank you very much. This is a great occasion. I'm really impressed with the number of people who have come, and knowledge is power. It's not limitless power, but it helps to know more about what you're facing. So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, been for about 25 years. Kansas, then here, so it was interesting to hear the comparisons to Kansas. But been in Oregon since 2001, doing inpatient hospital work and outpatient. It's interesting to hear the recent research about does marijuana cause psychosis or schizophrenia, because I sure have had patients where it looks like that. I've had a number of patients in the hospital who are quite ill, quite psychotic, and as near as we can tell, the reason is the marijuana. A lot of marijuana every day for years especially can raise the risk of acting quite psychotic. I've also had patients who either before or after that hospitalization, we kind of figured out they had schizophrenia, and that also seems very clear that they're more susceptible to the hallucinatory and disorganizing effects of marijuana. So that's very true as well from my experience. And a loss of IQ, loss of cognitive functioning. Yeah, I mean, there's an old, I guess it was Cheech and Chong, maybe I'm dating myself, the stereotype of the dope smoking hippies. Hey man, what do you want to do today? Hey, let's hang out and smoke a joint. And that's it for days, weeks, years. We've talked for years about the amotivational syndrome of marijuana use. I don't know if that's, as they say, still a thing, but it sure appears to be present. Maybe it's the loss of cognitive functioning that kids who smoke a lot of marijuana tend to not do a lot of other things. So I preach that. I do tell when I have patients who were either in the hospital or in my office or are smoking a lot of marijuana, and I say, hey, it's no big problem. I try to emphasize, yes, it is. There are many, many problems it can cause. In addition to being illegal, in addition to being smoke in your lungs, it is a drug. Lowers school performance, impairs performance at all kinds of tasks. I think we need to fight against it wherever we can. I don't necessarily say you have zero privacy, but if you've done something dangerous, then you have zero privacy. When kids are hospitalized, parents typically search their rooms and kids are upset. I say, listen, they're just desperate to find out what happened. Typically for a suicide attempt, but other things as well. Kids ended up in the hospital. Truly not just believing what they say, truly seeking every opportunity to find out what they're doing, to talk, have lots of conversations. And sometimes it's meaning set hard limits. You know, you look like you're out of it, and you always look like you're out of it when you go to Johnny's house. I think you're not going to Johnny's house for a while. Well, lots to say, but I think it's very, very important to work together. Last thing I'll say is it takes a village. It really does take a village, and villages are great. This is one right here. Get to know your kids, teachers, coaches, pastors, people that are important in their lives. Have the kids over to your house as much as possible so you get to know them. And if you're worried about your kid, talk to them. Talk to their teachers, coaches, pastors, and other parents. Work together. Never worry alone. I say this a lot. Never worry alone. Thanks.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? I didn't prepare anything. I was just kind of thrown on the stage here, so bear with me if I stumble on my words. My name's Kevin. I'm an Oregon City police officer. I'm currently assigned to Graveyard Patrol. I've been working the road for about 3 years. I had various experience volunteering before that. And basically what I was asked to be here is, in conjunction with working the road, I have different assignments as a police officer. I have the privilege and the opportunity of filling in as the school resource officer at the high school. So on occasion I get to talk to juveniles, handle the calls inside the school, and I would say the majority of them have something to do with some sort of substance abuse, as well as my calls for service on the road. I have an interest in drugs and substances that impair people, to include marijuana and other substances as well, along with marijuana. And one of the things I've done since I've been a police officer, just based on curiosity, is I arrest somebody who's been arrested, say 30 times in this county. They cycle in and out. They're being arrested for serious offenses, serious drugs, and I always ask them, hey, can you kind of tell me your story if you don't mind? How did you come to be this way? And I'll tell you, 90% of the time, they tell me, well, I started smoking marijuana in high school, or I was at a party and I was smoking marijuana and then my friend told me, hey, try this. And so I kind of see a common root and where all this kind of stems from. And anyway, that's kind of the experience I bring, both in my professional life as well as my personal life. I've had friends or associates that I knew in high school that had to break ties with. It all started with marijuana consumption in high school, moved on to college. It affected me sometimes applying for jobs, having those associates. So even if kids aren't using and they're just around it, I think sometimes the perception is that if I'm not using, I'm safe, but there's a lot to be learned, and thank you guys for being here.
Hi, sorry. I'm Amber and I work at the juvenile department. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, so my voice is not that great. I work with our juvenile drug court, and so these are kids who are doing intensive outpatient treatment. So they come to our juvenile department, or they do their different treatment groups at the juvenile department or at their behavioral health, and they do individual family counseling, they do groups, a couple groups a week, and then they also do family counseling and family groups as well. So obviously all of the kids that I work with have drug addiction issues, and all of the kids that I work with as well also started with using marijuana as their first drug, and then have moved on depending on hanging out with their friends or other people and things like that. So that's my experience with kids.
So I'm Paige, and one of the hats that I wear in my practice is I collaborate a lot with Amber at the juvenile department. And so I just want to speak from that perspective, because the families that I work with, by the time they get the services and the access to the juvenile department, are just heartbroken. And the thing that I hear repeatedly is that it had to get to this level for them to access services, because it's really hard for families to know where to turn to help, where to get support, and those kinds of things. And so I'd echo some of what Judge McNeese said is, as parents or as mentors, coaches, teachers, whatever role you are, to really pay attention to what's going on in our youth's lives. Because if there's anything that we can do to get in there and stop some of this sooner, give them more direction, provide clarity, talk with them about the choices that they're making and why they're making those choices, you have a chance to stop it before it gets to that level, before you feel pretty hopeless and you're exhausted and all of those things. Because it's really heartbreaking to have to work with the families who feel like, they didn't want that for their child. Their child certainly didn't want it for themselves, and just to feel that desperation. So if I would echo some of what where the panelists have talked about, talk with your kids ahead of time, give them the information, set some really clear structure, and be consistent to that structure. So the kids know what the boundaries are, and they can move within those boundaries, but then they know what their response is from a parent perspective if they go outside of those boundaries, that we don't stick our head in the sand and just ignore it.
Hang on to that. We'll try this one. So I would ask Eric and the judge to come back up. and we're going to have you guys sit up here, and we're going to start going through the questions. And I've already received a number of them. If you wish to ask a question, please fill out. We've got folks walking around to pick those up. And what I guess for the 6 of you now, when I read a question, I'm going to ask that whoever feels comfortable go ahead and take the mic and go forward. If somebody else wants to follow up on that, we can. The first question I've got here is, can kids get addicted to pot? Is it really addictive? Now, Eric, I know you just spent about 30 minutes on that, but does anybody else want to touch on that?
Anybody else want to touch on that?
You're the expert.
Okay. So, yes, it's in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's just generally accepted in psychiatry, behavioral health, and addiction treatment that marijuana can be an addictive substance, but obviously it's to some people. So I showed you the chart of the people who use the most, and it's similar to alcohol, it's similar to tobacco and other drugs. There's a lot of people that use chemicals occasionally, and then there's some people that use chemicals chronically. So people do meet the diagnostic criteria for cannabis dependence, a substance use disorder, and they meet all of the symptoms: tolerance, withdrawal, negative life experiences, and an array of problems in their life that classifies it as an addictive disorder.
Because I know a couple of our speakers talked about the people that they see often started as young people with marijuana and then progressed to harder drugs. Does everyone, and of course in my world, I see a lot of that as well, obviously. Does everyone who smokes marijuana end up being a heroin addict or a meth addict?
No, it's just that a lot of people don't understand when scientific preventionists came up with the term gateway drug, most people in society heard the word cause, that alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana cause addiction to cocaine or heroin. And that's not what they meant. They said when they looked at hundreds of thousands of kids, they found out that kids walked through the gate of alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana before they started using other drugs like cocaine and heroin. And when they looked at kids that were using cocaine and heroin, they couldn't find any that had not started on alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, and that's what they meant. They were talking about a correlation, not causation. But people in society heard the word cause, or they thought the word cause, and they sort of rebelled against that idea, which makes sense that you would rebel against that idea because it's not cause, it's correlation. And of alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, of those 3 drugs, which one has the highest correlation, the highest statistical probability for later illicit drug use? Tobacco. Early onset tobacco use has the highest correlation with later illicit drug use later in life.
Great, thank you. Question here for the panel. How many kids in Oregon City actually use pot? Paige, do you want to take that, or is there?
I think it's probably the officer, Amber, who's probably best suited for that.
Okay.
I would have no... I would have no idea to answer that intelligently, but Eric? Okay.
You want to sit here?
So I'm not sure about Clackamas. I think Clackamas numbers are, when it comes to marijuana, I believe in the SWS, it's a little bit lower than the statewide average for marijuana, just ever so slightly. But in Oregon, for example, among 11th graders in the SWS, the Student Wellness Survey, about 33% report past 30-day alcohol use, so that's 1/3. It's about 19% thereabouts for marijuana use in the last 30 days. For tobacco, it's about 10%. And for non-prescribed prescription drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, it's about 7%. And for drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and stuff like that, it's a little over 2%.
Thank you.
For 11th graders.
Dr. Ansroth, I've been hearing about marijuana and causing psychosis, and I know you touched this on your comments. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Is it real?
Well, I think the research, as Eric was saying, was a little more clear than what I've thought and experienced. It doesn't cause schizophrenia per se, but it increases the susceptibility to psychosis or triggers or activates. I think that makes sense with my experience. Triggers or activates a vulnerability to psychosis or schizophrenia. So there may be at some point a blood test that can be taken to see if you are a person who is at risk for becoming schizophrenic or having schizophrenic-like symptoms from marijuana. There are probably going to be a number of those kinds of genetic tests that will evolve to be available to regular people. We don't have them yet. I think I would more look at it if there's any family history of schizophrenia or psychotic disorders in your family, extended family, particularly close relatives. You shouldn't touch the stuff or something like that. You are more risk for potentially having that kind of an illness or getting activated by cannabis. Go ahead.
Thanks. What is the legal risk of an adult providing marijuana to a teenager? Kevin, do you want to take this one, or?
Yeah, maybe you can add to it. What was it? Can you repeat the question, please?
What is the legal risk of an adult providing marijuana to a teenager?
The legal term that I operate on is DCS, or distribution of a controlled substance. It holds true for any illegal narcotic, specifically marijuana. It is a felony in the state of Oregon. It's something that's very serious. It would go to the Clackamas County District Attorney's Office. But me, myself, I've been involved in cases where adults are arrested for providing marijuana. Typically, it's kind of a relationship where it's an older friend's brother or something like that. But there have been more serious cases where an actual grown adult is providing the marijuana to younger folks. And I would say 99% of the time it leads to an arrest and a prosecution of a felony crime.
And I might comment, Measure 91 did not change DCS to a minor with marijuana. It is still a Class A felony, and if there's more than a 3-year difference, you're at risk for significant prosecution. Thanks. Next question. I use cannabis, and I don't think it's a big problem. What's the best way to tell my kids that I'm a regular cannabis user?
Okay. So I think that that's a really difficult conversation to have with your youth. And I think that you have to look at what is the purpose of sharing that information. Because in all of my years, I haven't had a adult or a parent share that information with their child and have it really kind of come back well, where they're like, I'm so glad that you told me about that, Mom, because now I'm not going to use. It's usually kind of turned the other way in a more negative sense. So it's not that there can't be any learning that could happen. It's just not often the case, and it's often used against you. So I think that can be really challenging. But Eric, you might have something to add to that.
Yeah, it becomes clearly a kind of a double message. Do as I say, not as I do. You can say, well, I'm an adult, and that is the best clear argument. Adults can legally drink alcohol and buy it anywhere. Minors can't. But it's tough to have a conversation where you say, I smoke a lot of marijuana, but I don't want you to do that. Really? Frankly, I think it's a tough choice, life choice, to consider quitting if you really want your kids to not use. Lead by example. That's what I would have to say. Unless you have a clear medical reason you need it, if you want to lead your kids, quit.
Amber, this next one's for you. What happens with the juvenile department or legal system if my child gets caught with marijuana or using it and is under the influence?
Well, if it's their first time, they'll come to the juvenile department and they would go through what's considered diversion. So they would probably be asked to get a drug and alcohol assessment, which would then figure out what level of treatment they would need, or if they need treatment at all, or if it was their first time. And then probably some type of educational class And then they're probably involved with the juvenile department for a short period of time if it's their first time. They could also lose their driving privileges for up to a year as well. And even if they do get their license back, it's still on their record, and so the cost for insurance and everything is pretty high.
The other thing I would comment on, go ahead and pass to the judge, is that Measure 91 did not change the laws as it relates to youth. Marijuana still has the same consequences after July 1st as it did before, for youth.
Could you expand for the folks here about the juvenile drug court program?
Great.
So the juvenile drug court program is kids who have been using drugs and alcohol for quite a while. It wouldn't be their first time use, but it is a program that kids can get in if they're referred to the juvenile department and they reach the criteria of the 2.1 treatment. Then it's anywhere from a 7-month at the minimum program, and kids finish up to a year and a half. It just depends how well they do in the program, if they do their treatment, if they engage in the treatment, if they can stay clean and sober, and if they can truly remain in the program and not have to take other, like maybe go into shelter care or something like that because they're struggling at home. It just is up to the kids and families about how much they want to engage in the program and the treatment.
Thank you. Next question. I'd rather my teen smoke marijuana than drink. Why is marijuana worse? I don't know who wants to take that. Eric?
Well, I don't know that marijuana is worse than kids drinking, but kids aren't supposed to be drinking. So I'm not, it seems almost like a false choice. Like, well, I have to let my kids use some drugs or alcohol. I have no choice. I have to do that. I think that's sort of a false choice, but I would say that generally that alcohol is worse than marijuana, but there are risks associated with marijuana, and one of the risks that we often don't talk about is the combination of drugs. So in research on driving fatalities, what drugs are going to cause the highest probability of driving fatalities? What are those going to be? Say it again? Drugs. Is cell phones a drug now? I guess it can be like a drug. People are addicted to it. Yeah. Well, it's actually alcohol in combination with marijuana. Alcohol in combination with marijuana, driving faded, presents the highest risk, the highest statistical liability for a car accident and fatal car accident. So more than alcohol alone, and significantly more than marijuana alone. So, parents have to be concerned about kids combining alcohol and marijuana. And if anybody's ever done that before, combined alcohol and marijuana, you know how impairing that is.
It's my understanding that my son died of a combination of alcohol and drugs, and that is how he passed.
I think there's a hidden risk of underestimating or misjudging the impairment and the problems from marijuana. Yes, probably alcohol is a greater poison to the body systems and maybe more quickly impairs by itself, but combinations of marijuana with all kinds of things are bad. And the idea that is in so much popular culture that it's no big deal, it's really not doing anything, that's dangerous.
If your child has a drug problem, who can you contact to seek help? Paige, do you want to start with that? Or?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
If you find your child has a drug problem, whether that's alcohol, marijuana, or harder drugs, who can you contact within the system to seek help?
Right, and that's a great question, and that's kind of what I was referring to before, because it can be difficult. So if you're concerned, my first recommendation is to get some information. Talk with their coaches, their teachers, friends, whoever you can gather some information to find out what they're noticing too. And then I would recommend getting an alcohol and drug evaluation. There's a lot of places that offer them, even at no cost, to get more detailed information and find out what the recommendations might be. Definitely having open conversations. Sometimes as parents, we get very worried, we get really concerned, and sometimes we get really reactive in that process. And we try to shut it down and have some control over something we don't feel like we can control. And that's true, we can't. So I would encourage not doing those things, not being really reactive, and trying to have an open conversation with your child so you can get the help that you need, so they're not pushing back and kind of running away from you. But definitely seeking an alcohol and drug evaluation and then looking at what the options are from there is the best route.
And I want to note, we're only going to go to about 7:55 with questions, so I'm not able to read all of them. They are phenomenal questions, thank you, but I'm trying to get to the ones that aren't necessarily duplicative. Are there any long-term emotional symptoms caused by early age marijuana use? Long-term emotional symptoms caused by early onset or early use of marijuana. I think we have the doctor's ready to, want to provide the doctor? Sorry. Okay.
Well, Eric probably speaks to the research better. I know that any drug that you use a lot and you're numbing out your emotions and you don't learn things. You don't learn how to cope with distress of all kinds. So that can lead to higher levels of anxiety. I think there's some evidence of actually physiologically causing anxiety, a kind of paranoid level of fear even, but definitely anxiety. Even though the kids that I talk to, why do you use that stuff?